Hey everyone, it's Alora and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing another book haul. I recently picked up quite a few books to read during this period of self-isolation and I wanted to share some of them with you. This video is going to be broken into two separate little parts. The first part will comprise all of the books that I purchased within the last week or so, and then there are a couple extra books that I wanted to add in that I bought within the last few weeks or since my previous book haul went up. Alright, the first book that I'm going to show you is called Fierce Fairy Tales, Poems and Stories to Stir Your Soul by Nikita Gill. Now this is the author of Great Goddesses, which was this kind of poetry slash prose collection that focused on mythology and goddesses in specific. This compilation was actually her first book and it has different fairy tale inspired stories. So I'm very excited about this. One thing that I like about her books is that she has these illustrations strewn throughout, and so that's really fun too. I personally am a huge lover of fairy tales and stories that are reminiscent of fairy tales because they feel, there's something about like a fable or a fairy tale that's just so enchanting and delightful and magical and makes me feel so nostalgic for my childhood when those were the stories that I primarily read, and yeah, so this is just a happy one. The next book that I purchased was Miyazaki World by Susan Napier. This is obviously a story about Hayao Miyazaki. If you don't know who Miyazaki is, he was the director who did the majority of the Studio Ghibli films, especially the ones that came out about when I was a kid. And so this again has that huge nostalgic touch, and I'm just really excited to learn more about his life. I actually have another book about Miyazaki that I haven't read, so I'm not really sure why I purchased another one, but what can you do? I'm going to become the expert, the eminent expert on Miyazaki apparently by the end of this. The next book that I picked up was by A.S. King and it is called Dig. It's one of her more recent books. I don't think it's her most recent book, but A.S. King is well known as a YA surrealist or fabulism author, and I've only read one of her other books, so I'm not really sure where I stand or if I'm on the A.S. King bandwagon, but I've heard that this one's really good, and apparently it's about a family of potato farmers, and I personally love potato farming. Like, I love digging up potatoes. I know that's kind of a weird thing, but now you have a random fact about me. I'm a big fan of potato digging, so maybe I'll find some camaraderie with the characters through that. I'm gonna take a little turn here and move on to I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek Shraya. Now, Vivek Shraya is a transgender woman who is a musician and an artist of many forms, and who also teaches at a university, teaches creative writing as an associate professor, so that's exciting. And she wrote this little, it's not really a collection, but it's tiny. It's like this little singular essay about misogyny, essentially, and the many ways that Vivek has experienced people making her afraid, and she speaks to how men make her afraid, how other gay men make her afraid, and straight men, and I say other gay men because part of this book is written from her perspective before she made her transition to being a woman. So she has multiple perspectives on gender and sexuality in here. Essentially focuses on all of these little ways in which she has been oppressed for initially being a gay man and now for being a transgender woman. And it kind of leads you along this thought path of how can we work together and how can we individually stop being misogynist, stop putting women down. And so great little tiny essay. Another book that I picked up recently was Severance by Ling Ma. This is a book about the apocalypse, so apropos for the times. Hopefully not quite in this way. This is a book about a woman living her life, I think she might be a secretary or something, when basically a zombie virus starts infecting the population. And I hear that it's kind of slow building. I hear that it's a bit surreal and a bit satirical, which sounds like an interesting approach to this kind of topic about loneliness and about contagion and about society and society's crumbling, and so I just wanted to read it. I also picked up In 5 Years by Rebecca Searle. This book I haven't heard a lot about, but I heard that it's essentially about this woman who has her whole life planned out. Like, she has her 5-year plan, and in her plan she has this great career and she's married to the person who she's currently engaged to, and then she has some sort of dream about this other man and this other life and this other career, and she decides to kind of just ignore it, and she moves on with her life. But in 5 years she actually meets the man that was in her dream about that other life. And so I think that it's partly about how you can't plan for your future, and how sometimes the best things in our lives are the things that we didn't anticipate and the things that we did not expect or didn't even push for, didn't even work towards, but some delightful, unexpected occurrences can happen and your life can be taken in an entirely different direction, and that can be the best thing that ever happened to you. The next one is kind of silly. I picked up Strange Planet by Nathan Pyle. If you've ever seen his Instagram account, he posts a lot of these are little like alien comics that are funny descriptions of real life situations, and I love them, and so I just wanted to have a little compilation of them to be able to read through the whole thing and then to have a cute little coffee table book or something. The next book that I picked up was American Panda by Gloria Chow. I've heard quite a few things about this, and it seemed like it would be cute, but it's also about an important topic. It's about this Taiwanese girl who's living in America with her family, and so I guess she's a Taiwanese American, and she essentially is at MIT studying biology, and she's doing everything that her parents prescribed for her, and they want her to marry a Taiwanese man, and she just realizes that she doesn't like the subject that she's studying. She does not want to become a doctor, she does not want to marry a Taiwanese man, and she just wants to live her own life following her own internal guidance. And so it sounds nice, and kind of like a lovely little light read that also has a bit of a message. The next one that I have to show you is called The Last True Poets of the Sea by Julia Drake. This has just a stunning cover, and I think that it sounds really lovely. It's about this, but lovely in a different way than the last kind of fun, lovely book. This sounds really heartwarming and maybe heartbreaking too. It's about this girl who's been going to treatment for alcohol and drug abuse, and she is pretty young, I think 17, 18, and she ends up for a summer going back to her family's hometown, not the hometown where she grew up, but kind of the hometown where maybe her parents and her grandparents grew up, and it's this place called Lyric in Maine, I believe. Why do I think it's set in Maine? It is set in Maine. So it's kind of a story of her in this little coastal town, and I think that it interweaves some of her grandmother's story, or maybe her great-grandmother's story too, but just her kind of redeeming herself and coming back into the world. And I think it sounds really nice. So I'll let you know once I read it. The final one in my first stack of books that I bought in the last week is Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. Now, this is written by an Indigenous queer person, and I believe it follows the character over the course of only a couple of days, and he's going back to I don't want to be wrong, but I think he's going back to the reservation where he grew up, and he is a queer person, or I think he also calls himself Two-Spirit. The main character is somehow involved in the sex industry and then has to go back home to the reservation for, I believe, a funeral. So it's kind of following his life over a few days, getting his act together, reliving some of his current traumas and childhood traumas, and just figuring out how to be himself when he's going from this very different environment back to his home environment on the reservation. Sounds really good, and it's pretty short. It's only 223 pages, so that's nice. All about those short books these days. I don't know why. They just feel more accessible, like easier to dive into when I know that I'll be able to finish them pretty soon. Okay, I have 3 more books to show you. The first one is from my book of the month for March, and that was A Good Neighborhood by Therese Ann Fowler. This is a story about... how do I summarize it? This is a story about a woman who's owned her property forever, and suddenly there are new neighbors, and they're disrupting the soil as they build their new house and build their new pool behind their house. And the woman has a huge, beautiful oak tree on her property that's been there the entire time she's owned the house, and it's really special and meaningful to her. And she's also in forestry, so she's a forestry professor, I believe. And so she knows a lot about ecology, and she knows a lot about what's happening, and the tree is starting to die from all of this construction. So this is a story about her suing her neighbors, essentially. But it's also a story about... that's just the setup. It's also the story about these 2 teenagers falling in love, the son of the woman with the oak tree and the daughter of the family who's just moved in. It's about rebuilding your life after having a rough childhood. It's about blackness in Southern America, and it also has a lot of legal procedural stuff in there, so if you're interested in that, I would check it out. I have read it. It was so hard-hitting. I definitely cried in this book, which I wasn't expecting to do, and I would definitely recommend it if you're a fan of suburban dramas but also want a little bit more substance. So this deals heavily with racism, then this would be a good choice. The next book I want to show you is just a really fun one, and it's Baking with Kim Joy. So I don't know if you've watched The Great British Baking Show, but if you have, you'll recognize Kim Joy. She's so delightful. She makes the most whimsical creations. She decorates so beautifully and daintily, and she just is really cute. She's cute and her stuff is cute, and I love baking. So I don't know if you know this about me, but I actually read cookbooks all the way through. So I'll read them front to back, cover to cover, and I love her recipes. She has so many cute ones. I wanted to show you this one, this little woodland cake. Look how absolutely freaking adorable that is. And then also I made some llama cookies based off of this cookbook, and they were supposed to look like that, but mine didn't quite end up being that cute. But anyway, she has just the most wonderful decoration style. She also has some vegan options and substitutes in here in her recipes, which is really thoughtful, and I am really enjoying it. So if you need something delightful and you like baking, this might be a good pick for you. The last book that I wanted to show you is a sequel to a book that I read last year, which was the 5th season, and the sequel is called The Obelisk Gate. I always pronounce that word wrong, so I can never remember which way it's actually pronounced now. You know, when you had in mind how a word was pronounced and then you learn the real pronunciation and then you just get them muddled in your mind and you don't know which one's which anymore. Anyway, this is the sequel to a fantasy dystopian kind of post-apocalyptic series. There's kind of this group of people on the planet who know how to control the earth. It's sort of magic, but it's not. It's like they can sense when the earthquake is coming and they can disrupt the rocks, and it's pretty cool. But it's also about how they've been subjugated because they're too powerful and people are afraid of them. And it was a story that followed 3 perspectives. It's really interesting. It follows this little girl as she's going to the academy. She's being taken away from her home. It follows this 20-some-odd-year woman named Cyanite who is so angry at what's been done to her, but is also just incredibly powerful, and kind of her figuring out what she wants to do with that power, if she wants to rebel against these shackles that have been placed on her because she's powerful. And then it's also about this woman whose little son just died and her daughter has been kidnapped by her husband, and so she's going to find them on this big quest after this huge earth-shattering earthquake where all of these towns were destroyed, all of these cities were destroyed. It's kind of like a lawless time, and it was a really, really good story. So this is the sequel to that, and these books actually won the Hugo Award 3 consecutive years in a row, the first, second, and third installments in this series, which is incredibly impressive. So I am looking forward to diving into this second installment. I don't know if you can hear the wind outside, but it is pretty crazy. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found some inspiration for some fun books to pick up if you are looking for some new reads during this time of quarantine. Which is kind of a scary word, but that's what it is. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts were on them, and I will be putting out some videos with my recent reads for 2020 very soon, so you can look forward to that. Until next time, I am sending you so much love.